Don't forget that you're listening to Nightmare.
Hello everyone, good morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you may be reading this message. I never dared to tell what I went through, but I've been listening to you for a while and I want to share my story with you. I hope you can read it. I apologize if this story is long, but I want to tell you everything that happened. My name is Saeed and I live in a well-known city. What I'm going to tell you happened 2 years ago in a month of November when I was 16 years old. Like any normal girl, I had a group of friends and was attending high school. It was at that time that I met the sister of one of my classmates. She was a nice, quiet girl, and our friendship lasted throughout the 3 years of high school. We saw each other a lot, and she almost lived at my house. My mother loved her like another daughter. Over time, we entered college, but unfortunately, we didn't stay together, although we continued to see each other constantly. Our friendship was one of the best I had. She was one of the few friends I had, and also her younger sister, who hung out with us. I was the oldest of the three, since my friend was 1 year younger and her sister 2 years younger. I was in the 3rd semester of college when something happened that changed my life irreversibly. The sadness and not knowing what really happened to my friend still torment me. Although we were no longer in the same school, we still saw each other in the afternoons since we lived close. Despite that, one day I felt a strange anxiety to see her. I didn't know why, but I had a feeling that something had happened to her. I decided to go to her house to visit her since it had been a week since I last saw her. When I arrived, I found her younger sister completely alone. This struck me as strange because usually her siblings and her mum would be home at that time. The younger sister told me that there had been an emergency at the college, and that was when I began to feel that something was going wrong. She explained that my friend had had some kind of crisis while presenting in class. She started staring at a fixed point in the back of the classroom and suddenly passed out. When they revived her, she began to speak incoherently, saying that something was following her and shouting that she didn't recognize her classmates. She was quickly taken to the hospital, but since that day, I haven't heard from her. That night, when her mother came back from staying with my friend at the hospital, she told us that she was fine but would stay there for a few days for observation. I couldn't help but worry, as all of this seemed very strange. The next day, I went to the house to stay with my friend's sister, hoping to learn more. Her mother, upon returning from the hospital, told us that my friend kept mentioning our names, hers and mine. She gave us permission to visit her, but since we were minors, we were told we'd have to go the next day. That was when I started to wonder what was happening to my friend and what those strange events meant. I stayed overnight at my friend's house to accompany her, and so we could go to the hospital very early, as her father was going to take them that night. However, I couldn't sleep well. I was in her room when, around dawn, a noise woke me up. It sounded like very strong weavings, but I didn't want to pay attention to it out of fear. What I can confirm is that there was a heavy atmosphere in the room, something I couldn't fully understand. The next morning, we headed to the hospital. Along with her mother and brother, we were able to enter the area where my friend was, but due to the hospital's policy, we only had 10 minutes to see her, as she was a minor. The atmosphere in the hospital was thick with nervousness, and I couldn't stop thinking about what was being said about my friend's condition. My heart kept racing. All I wanted was to see her well, to know she was getting better. When I finally reached the floor where she was, I saw her and couldn't help but smile. However, something puzzled me. She looked a bit chubbier than I remembered, and I was told that the weight gain was due to the fluids they were administering to her. My friend was short and slim, and this transformation surprised me. What worried me the most was seeing that her wrists were tied to the bed, which made me feel even more anxious. My friend saw me and smiled immediately, but I couldn't help but hug her and ask how she was feeling. At that moment, her mother arrived to feed her, as it was lunchtime. As I watched her eat, I tried to comfort her, telling her she would recover soon. My greatest wish was to see her well, leave the hospital, and enjoy a normal day, as if nothing had happened, just like when we had planned to go eat sushi. But as I looked at her, I couldn't shake a strange feeling. Something in her eyes, in her attitude, seemed different. It felt like there was something malicious or mocking in her gaze, which made me deeply uncomfortable. The fact that they had her tied to the bed made me think even more about the seriousness of her situation. That same afternoon, I stayed at my friend's house to keep her sister company. The house was in deep silence, and a feeling of unease began to invade the space. It was then that her sister confessed something terrifying that had happened after my friend's discharge from the hospital. She told me that that my friend had been tied to the bed because on the nights before, she would get up in the early hours of the morning, agitated, and start screaming in a way that caused her to harm herself. It was her mother who had to endure these terrifying experiences, putting up with the screaming and my friend's strange behavior. She even told me that my friend would insult and curse anyone who came near her, even hitting a much larger orderly. The nights of terror repeated frequently, and despite many tests at the hospital, no physical cause was found to explain her behavior. My friend spent 10 days in the hospital, and all the tests came back normal. The doctors couldn't find any medical reason for her outbursts. However, the episodes of aggression and agitation became more frequent. They had to administer strong medications to calm her, but the attacks kept happening. Her situation was a mystery. On one hand, the tests said she was perfectly healthy, but on the other hand, her behavior and the strength with which she acted had no explanation. At first, I thought it was just stress or a psychological issue, but as time passed, something inside me told me there was something much deeper and darker behind all of this, something that no one seemed willing to explain or understand. My friend's mother told us something terrifying that happened one night when, supposedly, her daughter was asleep. She was praying for her, seeking answers about what was happening to her. Suddenly, her daughter grabbed her hands, forced her to get up, and when she looked at her face, the mother saw something she would never forget. Her daughter's eyes were filled with immense hatred, and with a voice full of rage, she said, "Shut up, you're useless. I can't stand it when you pray. I hate it." The mother, shocked, realized that it wasn't a physical or psychological issue that was happening. Something much darker was at play. It was then that she understood her daughter was not sick, but was being influenced by something they couldn't understand. During her stay at the hospital, strange things started happening that the staff began calling her the possessed girl. Everyone who came into contact with her knew that her attacks were not ordinary, that what she was doing was not typical for a girl of her age. One day, the orderly who had hit her told her mother that, while facing her daughter stared at him and said, "No matter how much you pray or how much you do, she is already mine and will burn with me in hell. I will take her and her brother with me." My friend's younger sister who told me this also mentioned how the girl laughed in a macabre way while speaking. At that moment, her eyes turned completely white, and she looked as if she were possessed by something beyond human. My friend's mother was going through extremely difficult moments. There were times when her daughter seemed lucid, and in those moments, she would ask them to pray together. However, there were other times when every rosary her mother tried to give her was torn off and broken by the girl, screaming that it burned her horribly. The mother told us that seeing her daughter during these attacks was traumatic and horrifying, as her throat would swell abnormally, as if she were being consumed by something evil. Meanwhile, we could do much more than listen to the stories they told us because they wouldn't let us enter the hospital. My friend's mother also didn't want to share many details out of fear that the situation might worsen. One night, while talking on text message with my friend's younger brother, he sent me an audio that chilled my blood. In the audio, I clearly heard my friend talking to herself in her house. The situation was becoming increasingly terrifying. At one point, my friend's sister asked, "Is it you who wants to take my sister? What have you done to her?" At that moment, a macabre, hoarse and deep voice responded, "Burn." The tension in the air became unbearable when, in the background, the sound of a pot falling in the kitchen was heard. The next morning, my friend's sister told me that when she listened to the audio, she felt an inexplicable terror. She was alone in the house, and the voice was so clear that it seemed to come from an underworld, filling the entire place with fear. At that moment, she realized that something in the house was no longer right, something she couldn't explain. Desperate to find a solution, my friend's mother began seeking help from people who specialized in curing spiritual ailments. They took her to a healer who told them that there was nothing they could do for her anymore, that the evil possessing her was so strong that there was no turning back. However, the family did not give up. They continued searching for help and finally turned to people who performed exorcisms, hoping that this could save my friend. But although they were seeking answers, my friend's family soon realized that there was something much darker and more dangerous at play, something they couldn't control or understand, but which seemed to be slowly taking their daughter away. They told my friend's mother that, in fact, she and her other friends had played with the Ouija board, and that a girl named Emma was the one who had handed her the pact. From that moment on, the mother forbade Emma from coming near her daughter or calling her. Soon after, her father decided to take her to his house, believing that the evil was in the mother's home. It was there that the paranormal events intensified. One night, in her room, the face of a demon clearly appeared on the wall. I saw it, and it terrified me so much that I couldn't stop looking at that horrifying image. I still remember the feeling of fear that overwhelmed me when I saw it, and I have never been able to forget it. Things started to get even stranger. My friend's brother told me that in the early hours of the morning, a loud bang could be heard on the door and window 3 times, each one louder than the last. The situation was becoming unbearable. Meanwhile, my mother constantly warned me not to bring anything from my friend's house because she feared that something from that place might follow me. Despite her warnings, I decided to visit her house after 5 days. When I arrived, I found the whole family outside. Inside the house, everything was dark. After waiting for a while, I saw several people come out, including my friend's mother. My heart raced when I saw that my friend was still inside, and for the first time, I thought everything would get better. When I entered, my heart sank when I saw my friend. She had always been so lively and cheerful, with so much life ahead of her, but now she was unrecognizable. She had lost so much weight that her body looked almost skeletal, and her bones were visibly sticking out in a terrifying way. I would swear she weighed no more than 20 kilograms. Her skin had a yellowish tone, and her gaze was fixed on nothing. She couldn't speak or move on her own. Looking at her filled me with a deep sadness, as I couldn't understand how, in just a few days, she had ended up like this. As I got closer, I saw that her face and cheeks were covered with scabs, as if she had been hitting herself repeatedly. Her father explained that she would rub her chin against the mattress during her attacks, as if she were trying to ease some pain, but the result was even more heartbreaking. Her father tried to give her water, and we all tried to encourage her. Even though we knew she wasn't responding to anything, I felt a pressure in my chest that told me my friend was no longer the same, that she probably wouldn't survive this nightmare. Although I didn't want to accept this idea, it was impossible to ignore the feeling that something very dark was consuming her. I tried not to show my thoughts and smiled, telling her to be strong, that she would recover soon, and that her dream of going to Japan was still possible. But deep inside, I knew her situation was hopeless. That night, when her father took her away, I returned home with a feeling of sadness and fear. I told my mother everything, but with a worried tone. She told me not to have too many hopes of seeing my friend getting better. I didn't want to believe it, but something inside me told me she was right. That night, I couldn't sleep well at all. I kept waking up, feeling like something or someone was watching me. The feeling of terror and sadness was so intense that I couldn't shake it off. In my dream, I saw my friend coming to my house. She told me she didn't want to leave, that she wanted to stay with me. I just responded that she was free to go, that I would see her later. However, she clung to me with a desperation I couldn't understand. The most striking part was the hug we shared, a long embrace filled with sadness and farewell. When I woke up, I felt overwhelmed, as if a heavy weight had settled on my chest. That feeling stayed with me the entire night and into the morning when I decided not to go to school. I was completely down. I didn't want to think about the possibility of losing my best friend, especially because I still hadn't recovered from my father's death 3 months earlier. My life was in chaos, and amidst my pain, the thought that my friend might also leave this world destroyed me. I tried to distract myself during the day to act normally, but my mother soon noticed that something was wrong. I didn't tell her about the dream, but she could tell that something was deeply affecting me. That night, around 9 p.m., my mother's phone rang. When I answered, it was my friend's sister. At first, I tried to stay calm, but something in her voice told me that something bad was about to happen. As the conversation went on, my world came crashing down. My friend had passed away, and my heart was filled with an immense pain, like nothing I had ever felt before. I cried like never before. My mother saw me and, without saying a word, hugged me. She took the phone from my hands and listened to the confirmation. I went outside to get some air, unable to believe what was happening, but the shock of the news made me fall into an inconsolable cry. My mother hung up, and quickly we prepared to go to the funeral. My mind was completely blocked, not knowing how to face reality. When we arrived, I saw some high school classmates, and I went over to the family to express my condolences. My friend's sister, with tears in her eyes, told me that at the end of the funeral, I wouldn't be able to get close to her body. Hearing those words, my mind was filled with doubts, and my heart kept pounding heavily. With my friend's sister, I went outside to get some air, and she told me that my friend had passed away at 4 a.m. at her father's house. It was at that moment that I understood. My dream had been a farewell, a message from my friend who didn't want to leave. As I listened to her, a strange sensation ran through my body. She explained that although they hadn't said it at first, the family had suspected that the Ouija might have had something to do with everything that had happened. In fact, for a while, they thought I had been involved. However, the healers assured them that I wasn't. She told me that in the days leading up to her death, her father had experienced extreme paranormal situations. My friend would wake up in the middle of the night and stand at the foot of her bed, staring at him with hatred, while releasing a putrid smell that she couldn't wash off, not even with the soap the healers had given them. My my friend would vomit constantly and couldn't eat, which caused her to lose a lot of weight in such a short time. In the end, they had to care for her like a baby, even tying her to the bed to prevent her from hurting herself. Her sister explained that it all started when my friend, 2 weeks before her death, told her that she had seen a tall black figure with red eyes watching her. This figure terrified her, and she was convinced that something very bad was following her. The family began to suspect external influences, and upon learning that my friend had been involved with the Ouija, they became even more desperate. Although the healers ruled out my involvement, her sister confessed that during all this time, they lived in constant fear and confusion. In her final days, my friend was no longer the girl I knew, and everything happening at her father's house only confirmed their fears. Something dark and evil had taken her soul. My friend would see a strange figure every night that terrified her deeply. This presence haunted her, and every time she saw it, a very intense burning smell would surround her. The figure would tell her that it was going to take her, and although she was terrified, she didn't want to tell her mother, fearing it would worry her. She knew her mother was already going through a lot and didn't want to add more distress to her life. The terror that this figure caused her made her feel helpless, but she didn't want to talk about it. However, she knew something very dark and malevolent was lurking, something far beyond a simple nightmare. In time, the exact cause of her death was never truly known. Those who weren't very close to the family were told that her death was natural, but those of us who knew her well knew that wasn't the truth. We all had our own theories, but what happened was so inexplicable that we could never be sure what really happened to her. A few days before everything happened, my friend asked me something I'll never forget. Can you sell your soul? That question left me completely stunned, as she had always been so innocent when it came to such dark topics. I told her that anyone who made a pact with something dark always paid a much higher price than they thought, that sooner or later the price would be collected, and sometimes with interest. I explained that such a pact puts you at risk because, in the end, they always take back double or triple what they had promised. Although I didn't explain much more, her question left me uneasy, and it made me think that something was not right in her life. Somehow, that unease stayed in my chest, like a premonition of what would happen shortly after. The death of my friend marked a before and after in our lives, and that time was filled with strange and terrifying things that we couldn't understand. After her funeral, my friend's family continued to live through a nightmare. Even during the rosaries they prayed in her house, people began hearing strange noises, and the face of the demon that had appeared on the wall still seemed to persist. Everything in their house felt dark, as if something or someone was lurking. The strangest part of all is that for an entire year after her death, something very unusual happened to me. Every time the anniversary of her death came around, at 4 in the morning, I would wake up without fail. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but as the months went by, I realized that every time another month passed since her death, I would wake up exactly at that time. It felt like something was watching me, like something or someone was calling me. The sensation of being watched, of having something close but invisible, terrified me. I never told anyone about it because I feared they would think I was crazy, but it felt so real that I couldn't ignore it. Now, at 18, I look back and everything I went through with my friend still marks my life. My friend's sister told me that after a while, things in their house stopped happening. The family, seeking some sort of protection, started wearing medals as charms in an attempt to drive away the dark forces that seemed to have taken over their home. Although things in the house seemed to have calmed down, the experience left an indelible mark on me. I don't know what really happened to my friend or what led her to this tragic fate, but I'm sure something very dark accompanied her until her last breath. Today, at 18, I can say with certainty that demons exist. My friend knew the truth, but that truth will never come to light. She took it with her, and now all that remains is the mystery of what really happened while I try to find peace with what I experienced.